Some inventions look so ridiculous, you'd swear they could never work. And yet, they changed the world. A weapon made of bats. A chair designed to execute people with kindness. A hairdo that could kill you. They weren't just strange ideas. They were real, and they left a permanent mark on history. The question is, how did something so bizarre become so influential? Before we dive in, which weird invention do you think changed the world the most? Comment your guess below. When you think of World War II weapons, you probably imagine tanks, planes, and submarines, not tiny flying mammals carrying incendiary devices. But in 1942, the United States seriously considered bats as a potential tool of destruction. And not just considered, they tested them. The idea came from an American dentist named Lytle Adams, who, after visiting the Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, home to millions of bats, was struck by a thought. What if we could use them? To deliver small bombs? At the time, Japan's cities were largely made of wooden buildings. If small fires could be started all over a city at once, it could cause massive destruction without the need for traditional bombing raids. Adams believed bats were the perfect delivery system. They could carry tiny timed incendiary devices, be released from the air, roost in attics and eaves, and then ignite hundreds of small fires simultaneously. He pitched the idea directly to the White House. Surprisingly, President Franklin D. Roosevelt approved initial funding for the project, noting in a memo, "This man is not a nut." The military codenamed the planned Project X-Ray. The testing phase was complicated. Bats were captured, fitted with tiny napalm-filled devices weighing less than an ounce, and loaded into special containers that would release them at altitude. The idea was to drop these containers from bombers flying over enemy territory. Of the first large-scale tests took place at an airbase in Carlsbad, New Mexico. Hundreds of bats were released, each carrying a tiny incendiary. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to plan. Several bats roosted inside the testing facility, setting it on fire. In another trial, an airfield burned down after bats flew into the hangars. Despite these mishaps, the military saw potential. The Navy took over the project, running tests in Utah and even constructing mock Japanese villages to simulate the effects. The results were impressive. The bats were able to infiltrate buildings and start multiple fires, making them theoretically more effective than standard bombing in wooden cities. But by mid-1944, the bat bomb project was shelved. Why? Timing. The invention of the atomic bomb rendered it obsolete in the eyes of military planners. And so, after spending about $2 million in today's money and years of testing, Project X-Ray was abandoned. Still, military historians point out that, on paper, the bat bombs could have been devastatingly effective. And in an odd way, they predated modern ideas about unmanned, small-scale delivery systems, essentially the biological ancestors of drone warfare. Today, the bat bomb stands as one of the strangest and most inventive, if slightly horrifying, ideas to emerge from World War II. It shows how desperation, creativity, and war can produce innovations no one would have dreamed up in peacetime. The most ironic twist? The bats themselves, unwitting test subjects, became some of the most successful saboteurs in U.S. military history, just not against the enemy they were intended for. Paris in the late 19th century was a city of elegance, invention, and surprisingly, danger disguised as comfort. Amid the grand cafes and ornate salons, one bizarre creation made headlines for all the wrong reasons. A chair that could kill you. It was the era of colonial exhibitions, massive events where nations displayed the latest technological marvels alongside exotic animals, cultural showcases, and wonders from across the globe. In 1889, Paris hosted the Exposition Universelle, the same World's Fair that introduced the Eiffel Tower, but tucked away in one corner of the Exhibition grounds was a seemingly harmless piece of furniture that would spark urban legends for decades. The so-called death chair. The story goes like this. A beautiful, velvet-upholstered armchair was placed in a colonial pavilion, inviting weary visitors to sit and rest. But when they did, they often failed to get back up, not because it was too comfortable, but because it was lethal. According to rumors circulating at the time, the chair had been brought from one of France's overseas territories, where it was allegedly used as a tool of silent assassination. Built with hidden spring-loaded needles in the armrests and back, it could inject poison into anyone who leaned back to relax. The toxins were said to work slowly, making the victim feel only a mild discomfort at first, but leading to death hours later. Long after they had left the scene, French newspapers of the period ran sensationalized accounts, some claiming that high-ranking colonial officials and foreign dignitaries had been its victims. Others dismissed the stories as pure myth, a Parisian ghost story for the modern age. But the mystery was enough to draw crowds to see the chair for themselves. Legend took on an even darker twist when people began linking the so-called death chair to unsolved murders in Parisian high society. A few unexplained sudden deaths in the weeks after the exhibition only fueled speculation. Some claimed the authorities quietly removed the chair from display, while others insisted it was still somewhere in storage, guarded away from the public. Historians today remain divided on whether the Paris death chair ever truly existed or if it was simply a cautionary tale designed to thrill and horrify visitors. There are no surviving photographs or physical evidence, just the persistent whispers in old Parisian papers and memoirs. What makes the story so enduring is the way it plays into our fear of the familiar. We expect danger in the dark alleys, not in the velvet embrace of a chair. The idea that something meant for rest and comfort could instead conceal death is the kind of twist that sticks in the human imagination. Even if the chair was nothing more than an elaborate hoax, it speaks volumes about the mindset of the time, a blend of fascination with exoticism, mistrust of foreign objects, and a love for the macabre. In the world of bizarre inventions, it's one that may never be proven real, yet refuses to be forgotten. Long before Amazon promised drone deliveries and next-day shipping, Victorians were dreaming of a faster, more spectacular way to send letters, by rocket. In the mid to late 19th century. As postal systems expanded around the world, speed became the ultimate goal. Steamships and railways had already revolutionized mail delivery, but some inventors believed they could go one step further, firing letters directly to their destination, using gunpowder-propelled rockets. One of the earliest advocates of rocket mail was Congreve rockets, a type of military projectile used by the British Army. Originally designed for warfare, they inspired a handful of eccentric engineers to reimagine them for peaceful purposes. Why not replace the explosive warhead with a small fireproof canister containing letters and parcels? The theory was simple. Load the letters into a metal cylinder, attach it to a rocket, aim toward the destination, and light the fuse. The rocket would travel in an arc, and upon landing, the mail would be retrieved by the local postmaster or a designated receiver. In some proposals, the rockets would even deploy small parachutes to ensure a gentler landing. It sounded thrilling and looked even better in demonstrations. Crowds gathered to watch early tests where inventors fired rockets between ships, across rivers, or over steep terrain where normal postal routes were slow or dangerous. Newspapers praised the ingenuity and declared it the future of the post. However, there were issues. Rockets in the Victorian era were notoriously unreliable. Some veered wildly off course, landing in trees, rivers, or private gardens. Others exploded mid-flight, incinerating the precious mail. On more than one occasion, the fiery delivery system sparked accidental brush fires. The British Post Office began to worry about the potential liability, especially when one rocket reportedly shot straight through the roof of a barn. Perhaps the most famous early rocket mail demonstration came in 1810, when Sir William Congreve himself showcased the idea for the Prince Regent, the future King George IV. The demonstration worked, sort of. The rocket landed roughly in the right place, but the canister was dented, and the letters inside were singed. While the prince applauded the spectacle, it was clear the technology needed refinement. Even so, the dream didn't die. Experiments continued throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly in remote coastal areas and mountainous regions. In India, British colonial authorities considered rocket mail for crossing difficult terrain. In Germany, rocket enthusiast Gerhard Zucker promoted the concept well into the 1930s. And in 1934, a Scottish island called Scarp actually conducted a real postal rocket test, which failed spectacularly when the rocket exploded mid-air, showering the beach with fragments of half-burnt letters. Ultimately, rocket mail never became a mainstream postal method, but it did inspire later experiments in airmail, pneumatic tubes, and even missile-based package delivery during the Cold War. In a strange way, the Victorian dream of high-speed, airborne mail was reborn in our modern drone delivery systems, just without the explosions and singed envelopes. What rocket mail proved, perhaps more than anything, was that human beings have always been willing to risk a little chaos in the name of speed and convenience. It was bizarre, it was dangerous, and it was undeniably ahead of its time. In the 1920s, the world was fascinated by spiritualism, telepathy, and the idea that human thoughts could be detected, measured, and maybe even read. Into this cultural mix stepped an eccentric inventor named Dr. Isidore Couriat, who claimed to have built a device that could hear your thoughts, a bizarre contraption that looked like a cross between a deep-sea diver's helmet and a science. Fiction propped out the so-called thought-reading helmet was a bulky metal headpiece covered in wires, tubes, and strange antennae. Couriat claimed it worked by detecting the faint electrical impulses generated by the brain, then translating them into readable signals. Today, we know this is essentially the concept behind EEG, electroencephalography, but in the 1920s, it sounded like something out of a Jules Verne novel. According to newspaper reports at the time, the helmet had a series of copper plates inside, which would be pressed against the wearer's scalp. These plates were connected to a thinking machine, essentially a large wooden box filled with dials and moving needles, like a seismograph for the mind. When the subject was asked questions, the device would allegedly produce spikes, or patterns corresponding to their thoughts, emotions, or even specific mental images. Public demonstrations drew large crowds. In one famous exhibition, Couriat supposedly asked a volunteer to think of an animal. The helmet detected the image, and the machine wrote down, in a jagged line of ink, something the inventor interpreted as horse. Spectators were amazed, though skeptics noted the reading process relied heavily on the inventor's interpretation rather than any direct translation of brain activity. The idea of reading thoughts was both thrilling and terrifying. Newspapers dubbed it the end of lying, and police departments reportedly showed interest in using it for interrogations. The public, meanwhile, imagined a future where politicians, criminals, or even lovers could be forced to reveal their true thoughts, but beneath the hype there were serious flaws. The helmet was uncomfortable, heavy, and prone to producing random, unreadable data. Some engineers argued it was simply picking up muscle twitches or skin resistance, more like a crude lie detector than a true mind reader. Others suspected Couriat's demonstrations were staged, with subjects coached beforehand. By the 1930s, as real neuroscience advanced, the thought-reading helmet faded into obscurity. Still, it occupies a strange place in history, a bizarre invention. That, while scientifically dubious, foreshadowed legitimate brain scanning technology decades ahead of its time. Today's fMRI machines and EEG headsets are far more accurate, but they follow the same principle Corriot was tinkering with nearly a century ago. In hindsight, the helmet says as much about the 1920s as it does about its inventor. A decade, obsessed with pushing the limits of human knowledge, flirting with pseudoscience, and blending showmanship with genuine curiosity. It's a reminder that sometimes the strangest ideas aren't entirely wrong, just a little too early for their time. By 1944, the Allies were preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in history, the D-Day landings in Normandy. Success depended on one thing above all: surprise. But how do you hide an army of hundreds of thousands of troops from the most paranoid military machine on Earth? The answer: you don't hide it. You fake it. Enter Operation Fortitude and one of the strangest, most brilliant wartime deceptions ever conceived: an inflatable army. The U.S. 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army, was a unique unit made up not of hardened combat soldiers, but of artists, set designers, sound engineers, and prop makers. Their mission? Convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy, by creating an entirely fictional fighting force. The backbone of this illusion was a fleet of inflatable tanks, planes, and artillery. These rubber replicas could be inflated in minutes, arranged to look like a full armored division from the air, and then deflated and moved overnight to appear somewhere else the next day. From above, German reconnaissance planes would see row upon row of Sherman tanks baking in the sun, unaware they were filled with nothing but air. But the deception didn't stop at visuals. The Ghost Army blasted pre-recorded sounds of troop movements, construction, and gunfire through giant loudspeakers that could be heard up to 15 miles away. Radio operators created fake transmissions filled with believable chatter, complete with references to non-existent officers and units. Soldiers even dressed in the insignia of phantom divisions, walking into French cafes to, accidentally, let slip false rumors about upcoming attacks. One of the most famous moments came in the weeks leading up to D-Day. While the real invasion, forces quietly gathered in southern England, the Ghost Army staged a massive buildup of fake equipment across from Calais. German intelligence, convinced by the ruse, kept many of their best divisions stationed far from Normandy, giving the Allies a critical advantage when the real landings began. The inflatable army worked so well that even after D-Day, the Ghost Army continued to operate across Europe, staging fake troop movements to draw German forces away from real targets. Their efforts are credited with saving thousands of Allied lives and shortening the war. Yet for decades, their work remained a secret. Classified until 1996, the Ghost Army's story sounded almost too bizarre to be true, a Hollywood-worthy plot where art students and sound engineers used balloons, paint, and theater tricks to outwit the Nazi war machine. Looking back, it's a perfect example of how a bizarre invention, in this case rubber tanks, can have an outsized impact on history. It wasn't brute force that fooled Hitler. It was creativity, illusion, and a deep understanding of human perception. Today, some of the surviving inflatable tanks are on display in museums, looking almost comical. But during the war, they were deadly serious tools in a game of deception. That helped turn the tide. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't weapons at all. A hyper-realistic museum-style display showcasing a collection of strange historical inventions. In the foreground, gleaming brass and iron Victorian rocket mail launcher. To the left, a massive red velvet death chair with hidden metal. Needles. To the right, a bulky 1920s thought-reading helmet with copper plates and wires resting on a wooden table. In the background, rows of inflatable World War II tanks under dramatic spotlights. Warm, cinematic lighting with deep shadows, ultra-detailed 8K resolution, realistic textures of metal, fabric, and rubber, with floating dust particles in the air to create an aged, mysterious atmosphere.